Hello, good morning, and welcome to the webinar. This webinar is titled Virginia Resources for Utility Scale Solar Farms. My name is John Ignash. I work with Virginia Tech, the Department of Biological Systems Engineering, and Virginia Cooperative Extension, based in Harrisonburg, Virginia. The agenda for the session today is a brief introduction. We'll have 3 speaker presentations, followed by a poll question. And then throughout the session, please enter any questions you might have via the chat box, and we'll do our best towards the end of the session to try to respond to those or follow up offline. We have about 150 people signed up for the session, most from Virginia, but from other states as well. Based on the registration profiles, responses, it seems like we have some representation from landowners, personnel from state and federal agencies, some university faculty, PV project developers, photovoltaic project developers, utility companies, county planners, boards of supervisors, non-governmental organizations, among many others. Thank you to those that registered for this session, giving some feedback, responding to describe your interest in solar farms in Virginia. The feedback was helpful to kind of gauge what the nature of the interests are to try to inform some of the presentations. So here's a word art image to try to summarize that in a quick snapshot. We won't go into all these details, but the range of interest is quite broad. Similarly, with the second question during the registration process, things you hope to learn more about regarding solar farms in Virginia. Range of interests and topics to explore further is also quite broad. So thank you for sharing that feedback. That was helpful for informing the presentations for this session and also some future work down the road. Our goal for this session is to highlight 3 Virginia-based resources that can help provide more information on utility scale solar energy project development in Virginia. So with that, a few reminders. The session is now being recorded for later online viewing on a resource webpage. You actually have a link in the chat box, 2 links that I've shared. One is to a webpage where we have some artifacts from previous webinars on utility scale solar projects, one in December highlighting a project experience in Spotsylvania County with some related resources. Similarly, this webinar, once we have the recording, we'll post it there at that link on the web page, and also PDFs of the PowerPoint slides. Additionally, another link there is a link to an upcoming webinar scheduled for the middle of June, but more on that later. By default, your microphone should be muted. Please enter any comments or questions you have in the chat box. Again, our focus for this webinar is on utility scale solar energy project development in Virginia. It's a brief informational webinar. We won't have time to adequately answer all questions or cover all topics during this session, but with the goal is to introduce some resources for more information regarding these solar farms in Virginia. Here's a snapshot of the web page that I mentioned and some of the artifacts from last December's workshop, focusing on a project, utility scale project in Spotsylvania County. The web link, that hyperlink, is actually in the chat box. Similarly, there for this session, we'll include the full speaker bios from today, resources, information from related informational webinars, and like I mentioned, PDFs of these presentations, and a posting of the recorded version of the webinar. This is the webinar I mentioned that's coming up in June, so just a heads up in case it's something you might be interested in. It's Exploring Agrivoltaic Project Experiences, scheduled for June 18th. Right now, our featured speaker is from the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany. It's the largest solar energy research institute in Europe, and they're going to share some of their work with a range of agro-photovoltaic projects. So the intentional incorporation of ag production systems with PV systems. So if that's something you might be interested in, please consider signing up for that webinar, and links are in the chat box. So some general terminology for photovoltaic project sizes from residential, commercial, utility scale. So when we say solar farm or utility scale, what exactly are we talking about? Well, by relative example, residential, kind of residential rooftop systems might be 3 to 10 kW, or a commercial system is a bit bigger, say 10 kW to 2 megawatts, while a utility scale or a solar farm might be bigger than 1 megawatt, 2 megawatts, depending on the classifications. But in general, here's some pictures to kind of give that a little more context. So we have very small projects for different off-grid applications with photovoltaics. Then we have slightly larger residential systems. Then again, yet bigger commercial systems. And then these very large utility scale solar farms that are, in this case, this threshold is 2 megawatts or larger. While this focus of today's session is on the utility scale solar farms, if you have interest, information, needs, curiosities on any of these other systems, please let us know via the chat box or my email there, and we'll do our best to respond to provide you that information. The Solar Energy Industry Association, SEIA, they have a major projects list, and this is from December 2019, and they actually use a 1 megawatt threshold, so still large projects. This is at the continental United States. Each of those circles is some sort of solar energy project, either that's under construction, under development, or operational. When we zoom in to Virginia, this is the same map, but from 2016, so about 4 years ago. We zoom into Virginia, we don't see, or we didn't see at that time, a lot of circles. There wasn't a lot of projects in development, under construction, or operational in Virginia. Fast forward to the last update, which is from December 2019, and we see a lot more circles from yellow, orange, and red, indicating either under development, construction, or operational. And that's caused a lot of questions from communities, landowners, project developers that are involved with these projects to try to get up to speed and learn more about solar farms, utility scale solar projects. So these types of webinars are intended to help provide some information regarding those questions. With that, we will get started now with our featured speakers. First up is Carrie Hearn, Solar Program Manager from the Virginia Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. Carrie provides outreach and technical assistance for localities on utility scale solar siting and local government renewable energy procurement, including serving as sole SMART advisor for regions across Virginia. With that, Carrie, if you could take over and share your screen, you can begin your presentation.
Okay, excellent. All right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much, John and Virginia Tech, for hosting this webinar. And it's great to be here with everyone near and far. So I am the Solar Program Manager for the State Energy Office and have been in this role since September of 2019. The role that I serve in was actually created in the 2019 legislative session due to this increasing amount of need and demand for solar development across Virginia, and seeing that so much of these decisions around the siting of solar energy happens at a local level, to be able to create a resource and to provide state energy office support to localities and others that are navigating the process. So with that, we're going to focus first on, get this to move forward. Here we go. Okay. So a little bit of background around what has happened in the policy landscape that has gotten us to this point. So a number of things in very recent years that have helped us increase the amount of renewable energy that we're seeing across the state and expedite a transition to clean energy to meet our new clean energy goals. So that began in 2018 formally with the Grid Transformation and Security Act that deemed over 5,000 megawatts or 5 gigawatts of solar and wind energy projects in the public interest, and providing the energy efficiency investments over the next 10 years. And then about a week after I began here at DMME, Governor Northam signed the Executive Order 43, which calls for 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050. And then in the recent 2020 legislative session, as many of you know, those goals were codified through the Virginia Clean Economy Act that has a goal of 100% carbon-free electricity by 2045 and deems 16,000 megawatts of solar and onshore wind, and then 5,200 megawatts of offshore wind in the public interest. So that, formalizes these goals into law, into policy, and really is going to expedite that transition to meet those energy goals. And so
let me interrupt you just briefly. Is there a way for you to maximize the slides? On our end, they're a little bit reduced. If it's in presentation view versus presenter view, I think might be the issue here. We're getting some comments in the chat on that.
Okay, let's see. Let me try this again. Oh. Is that better?
Much better. Yes, thank you. Apologize for the interruption, but that's much more clear. Thank you.
Of course, yeah. So on Executive Order 43, this is an area that I've been working on quite a bit with others at DMME and through the governor's office to look at how we're going to get to these ambitious clean energy goals. And this slide is really meant to depict that there's a high level goal around this, that energy equity is a big component of that in terms of making sure that we can achieve these goals in a just manner that are helping to advance our focus on social equity and the clean energy goals, as well as our environmental outcomes. And some specifics from the 2020 session, I mentioned the Virginia Clean Economy Act, and then there's a number of others that complement this VCEA, as we call it, and that's the Clean Energy and Community Flood Preparedness Act that will enable Virginia to formally join the Regional Carbon Trading Mechanism, which is RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, as well as a number of solar-specific bills, including the revenue share for utility scale solar that has the option for localities to pass a solar ordinance that would, instead of using the current default machinery and tools tax exemption model, would switch that to a revenue share model that is, it charges up to $1,400 per megawatt of these utility scale solar projects that are over 20 megawatts. And the locality has to decide the dollar amount and if they're going to go that route. So it would require a solar ordinance to be passed at that local level. And then the Solar Freedom Bill has a lot of focus on rooftop solar and net metering. And then the final thing that I'll mention here on the policy side is the Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy Bill that enables the state to create a statewide CPACE program where financing can be utilized through the taxation on commercial properties to finance energy efficiency or renewable energy projects that are affiliated with that building or in that building. So a couple of other bills that passed, and I'm happy to follow up on the specifics of these. I don't want to spend too much time and get to some of the other topics, but there's just a variety of complementary bills that really shifts the landscape in Virginia to open up the opportunity to develop both rooftop solar systems on the residential and commercial side, as well as utility scale solar. And again, thinking about things like opportunity zones for siting, as well as the ordinances at the local level that need to really look at things like national standards to make sure that the manufacturing is at the highest level possible for both the panels themselves, as well as things like energy storage. And then this final bullet here, a special exemption for cash compensation enables cash proffers to be part of an application for siting utility scale solar. And it really just clarifies the legality of that and enables a project to cover certain expenses that a locality may be incurring around things like emergency response systems to make sure that that solar site is safe in the community and allows the locality to, make sure that their budget is being made whole. So before going any further, I just want to make sure that we're all thinking about the major impacts that the solar industry and of course others have experienced from the coronavirus emergency. And as we know, this is impacting, everyone across the board, and the solar industry has been especially hard hit. SIA estimates that 80% of projects are either on hold or delayed, and they have quite a bit more information on their website in terms of information that they've gathered through their surveys of solar developers, small and large, across the country. So the Department of Environmental Quality is the organization, the state agency in Virginia that offers a permit by rule process for systems that range between 5 megawatts and 150 megawatts. And this slide shows the numbers that are currently in the DEQ system, whether it is a notice of intent that has been issued or filed, or a permit by rule that's been approved and issued. And so we can see there are 46 permits by rule in the solar category, and that is a little over 1,700 megawatts that's been permitted. And then you've got, over, or not quite double that in the pipeline for notices of intent. And you can see the affiliated acres of all of those lined up. I just want to point out that this does not include systems that are putting their application in through the SEC. And it does not include numbers that are net metered or smaller than the 5 megawatts. And this also is a map that DEQ hosts. Again, this is the 150 and below to 5 megawatts category. And you can see the ones that are stars are actively producing power. And if you look to the west and southwest in the state, this is an area where DMME is focused to ensure that some of the abandoned mineland sites are also being made ready to develop utility scale solar. And there's a lot of different partners involved, but we want to help ensure that those are active lands, that they're producing both economic benefits and renewable energy power for the region and to the grid. And that's an area that has not received utility scale solar permits to date, but is certainly an area that we're working hard on to make sure that that can be moved forward and experience those benefits. So I really love this graphic. Ken German in our office helps to track the net metering data. And you can just see the exponential increase on these rooftop systems over the years, and it just continues to increase over time. So I put this out there to show that, you know, there's increase on both sides, and there also is a need to balance our clean energy system. It's going to require all different types of solar energy and wind to meet our clean energy goals by 2050. And even though this is a utility scale solar focused webinar, I just want to, you know, make sure that there's efforts as well to ensure that those rooftop systems can also be moving forward and helps balance out that demand for clean energy. And this is from SEIA as well at the national level. This is the installation forecast going forward. And you can see the split here again in terms of residential, non-residential, and then the gray is the utility scale solar that we're talking about today. And as Virginia has seen this rapid increase in utility scale solar over the past couple of years, there's certainly been a variety of challenges with that level of growth and making sure that there's the processes are available and transparent and accessible by all the different parties involved to make sure that there's a balanced approach and looking at the different challenges that we'll talk about a little bit later on. But this is sort of a variety of headlines that we're seeing in terms of both the opposition and support and the increase in the solar development across the state. And then the headline in the middle, this was one of the goals that was put in the Executive Order 43 around leading by example and ensuring that Virginia is also adopting clean energy. And so we signed an agreement to purchase 420 megawatts of solar and wind energy late last year. And so that helped us meet one of those goals in the Executive Order 43 pretty quickly. And I know some of the other presenters are going to talk about the variety of issues and challenges and considerations that come along with solar development. And these are all things that can be overcome, but they do need to be looked at and thought about in the application process in terms of siting and also the way that those energy systems are developed, and thinking about things like decommissioning at the end of life, or the amount of buffers that's on site. So we at the state level have been working on
And meanwhile, while we're waiting for Carrie to reconnect, see a chat from the or question in the chat box. I'll pose to Dr. Shoaib, Dr. Myers. Any idea, rough idea about how many megawatts could be generated per acre for a utility scale system?
I can say it depends upon your site and the type of system, but the rough rule of thumb, I think is it 2.5 megawatts per acre, Bill? Or is it 0.6?
Yep.
0.6.
Yeah. It's, I usually think about 10 acres per megawatt, something like that.
10 acres per megawatt, okay.
So about 10 acres of land to generate about 1 megawatt of utility scale solar PV. Let's see if there's other questions here. See if we can find Carrie out there. Dr. Shob, why don't I hand over the controls to you
Okay.
and you can start on your presentation. And I think Terry was just about to get to the UVA connection there. So,
Okay, okay, and I'll draw the connection for everyone, um, and then Carrie can make any revisions to that she would like.
thank you. Give me 1 second here and I'll give you a bit more of an introduction. Now, University of Virginia has a Virginia Solar Initiative. The Elizabeth Marshall wasn't able to connect for this web session. You'll hear her name because she's the senior project coordinator for the Virginia Solar Initiative at UVA. And she provides solar policy and technical support to local government officials and agencies across the state. Now, Dr. Shob, who we're about to hear from, is an economist, is a professor of public policy at the University of Virginia, and director of the Center for Economic and Policy Studies. He's also a university sustainability fellow which oversees the Virginia Solar Initiative. With that, Dr. Shob, I'll hand over the controls to you.
All right, so I'll go ahead and share my screen. Can you see my slide?
Perfect. Yes, thank you.
Great. I apologize. I'm a poor substitute for Elizabeth. She is an expert in planning and policy, and she is our lead on the solar siting part of our work on energy at the Weldon Cooper Center. But I'll do what I can to take her place today. My comments will have to be a little more general than what she could have provided, but what I'd like to do is give you a flavor of what we're doing at the Weldon Cooper Center in the Virginia Solar Initiative and with some of our other work, and how we might be able to contribute to the conversation around renewables development in Virginia. All right, so let me advance my slides here. There we go. Okay, so just to set the context that everyone already knows, you've already been introduced to, what's different about today's world is that renewables have become the cheapest new source of energy for a substantial range of our energy needs in Virginia. In particular, solar has the lowest long-run average cost of energy for Virginia now. This is reflected in the planning documents from our state utilities, and it's also reflected in state policy. The Virginia Clean Economy Act essentially makes a legislative acknowledgement that it's time to work to remove CO2 emissions from our energy supply. It's time to make more use of renewable energy for our electricity. And so, roughly speaking, in terms of what this means for utility scale solar, the Clean Economy Act essentially, in round numbers, requires 30% renewables by 2030, which is about 16 gigawatts of solar, and 100% non-emitting power by 2050, which, if you think about the contribution of the offshore wind and any a relatively small contribution of onshore wind, we'll need something on the order of 50 gigawatts of solar capacity in Virginia, along with other things, in order to meet our energy demand. So if you think about a strategy to get to the 2050 goal of a non-emitting power sector, there are several elements to the plan. We're going to have to have increased energy efficiency in all of the sectors of the economy. We're going to need to depend for solar and wind on a substantial share of our energy needs. We're going to need substantial investments in storage technology, and that storage will have to come in very short run, medium term, and longer term storage. because as everyone I'm sure is aware, we go through substantial periods where we have a combination of low wind and solar resources, and we'll need to have available energy to use to support the economy during those times. And then to get to carbon neutrality by 2050 will probably require some use of, say, natural gas as a backup, but with the proviso that we will be removing the CO2 emissions from the atmosphere in order to get to carbon neutrality. This last point's a little controversial. There may be ways to get to carbon neutrality without this combination of fossil fuel use and carbon removal, but that's going to require substantial development of new technology that we don't really know about yet. So as new technologies become available, we may be able to revise that. All right. So how will we meet these goals? Well, we'll have solar generation at all scales. This has already been mentioned. We'll have residential, commercial, industrial. We'll have community and shared solar. And I don't think that we've mentioned community solar yet. Community solar is sort of intermediate between solar that's owned by individuals and utility scale solar. So we might have a neighborhood of homes where each home doesn't have its own generation. For example, my own home is quite shaded. I couldn't really effectively put solar on my own home, but I might buy into a neighborhood solar development or a solar development somewhere else. And so I would have a share of solar generation. So there will be different multiple scales of solar generation being done in the state. Now, in order to meet these goals, in order to have all this solar, and solar is what we're concentrating on today, and so I won't talk anymore about wind resources and about storage, but this is going to be a major land use question for the next 20 or 30 years, because solar requires substantial amount of land, and land use decisions happen at the local level. Because we have this state policy for meeting carbon neutrality goals, but local planning, we need to mesh together the local planning process and statewide analysis of land use decisions. So we have to understand the implications for forestry and agriculture and community development of solar development, since it's such a substantial new land use that's starting to be put in use around the state. So some of the questions we're working on here at the Cooper Center are, how do we maximize the local value of the state renewable energy policy? What can localities do that will maximize the from taking part in this new renewables initiative? Just to think about the sort of opportunities and challenges that this implies. For a locality, there's tax revenue, there's employment, there's landowner income for leasing land for solar development. So there are opportunities, multiple opportunities for gains to localities from having these solar facilities. Plus, for localities that have an interest in contributing to lowering our climate impact, then participating in solar development is a great way to take part in that process. And any number of localities in Virginia have expressed an interest in being part of the global solution to the climate change problem. And this is one way they can help support that. Now, what are the key challenges? Well, this is a large scale land use. When you think about 200, 500, yes. Did I hear a comment?
No, please continue. We just had a little
Oh.
bit of background noise.
Oh, okay. All right. So when you think about a 1,000-acre development, this is a very large development from a locality's point of view relative to the average project that's brought to local planners. And so local planners need to have in mind to develop a response to potential proposals for solar development in their locality so that they're not blindsided when a large proposal for a land use change comes to the locality. The locality has to think about permitting. They have to think about the public services that might be required. One of the nice things about utility scale solar is that once it's built, the demand on public services in terms of the usual set, public schools, public safety, are generally lower than many other sort of developments that might occur. And so there's an interesting balance that the locality will be able to make between the income it brings in and the demand for public services. But of course, there are environmental impacts that every locality has to worry about. And in particular, during the construction phase of a solar facility, making sure that the construction doesn't result in damage from runoff. And then when the facility is in place, that it doesn't produce damaging changes in the local hydrology. So these are challenges, but challenges that have been met in many places around the country, and in particular in our neighboring state of North Carolina, there's just lots and lots of experience in making sure that solar developments are done with full consideration of the potential effects on the hydrological cycle. So these are things we have good evidence on, and we can bring that evidence to bear as we start to develop more solar in Virginia. These considerations Carrie had already laid out in one of her slides. We just want to make sure that as we're developing this new substantial land use, we're taking into account all of the concerns that localities may have. And again, fortunately, because solar has been a major new source of energy around the country, we have lots and lots of experience, not just way out west in the arid West, but also here in the East, in Maryland, New Jersey, North Carolina, and now Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, doing a lot of solar development. So we have lots of local experience that can help us make sure that we're managing all the considerations a locality might have. Now, I want to talk about SolSmart for a minute, because this is one of the new initiatives that the Weldon Cooper Center is undertaking along with the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. SolSmart is a program for helping facilitate local processes for managing solar development. The SolSmart program is funded by the Solar Foundation, and DMME and the Weldon Cooper Center are joining together to facilitate SolSmart training for the Middle Peninsula and for the South Side, and also for Southwestern Virginia, for the Coalfields region, on certification of localities in having met certain focus areas for thinking about, is the locality ready for when that big solar development is proposed in their locality? Have they thought about permitting? Have they thought about how solar development fits in with planning, zoning, and development rules? What about inspection, construction codes, the rights to solar, and all these other characteristics? So the SolSmart program is a training program or a certification program that ensures that localities have given thought to the various dimensions that facilitate the management of solar development in the locality in a way that can benefit both the developer and the locality. There are a lot of joint gains to be had if localities have spent time thinking about how to fit solar development into their local plans. And then this helps reduce, when localities have thought about this in advance, it helps reduce those soft costs of solar development. It helps make the development a better deal for both parties. And so we are now just getting started with SolSmart certification in a couple of regions in Virginia, in the hopes that we'll be able to expand this as areas of the state express a need or an interest in additional SolSmart certification. So just to give you an overview of what the Weldon Cooper Center and in particular the Virginia Solar Initiative is doing right now, we're preparing topic-specific guidance and best practice documents. We're going to produce a series of white papers and documents that help localities in their decision-making process. For example, we would like to make it possible for a locality to come to our site and explore the economic consequences of solar development for their locality. What kind of revenue can we expect? What kind of consequences are there for the local economy from having this new large industrial development in the locality? We also are going to be working on convening stakeholders, bringing the various parties together to share information and concerns with an eye to balancing the interests of the parties, but ultimately to maximizing the gain from renewables development in the Commonwealth. And we think there's a lot of gain to be earned by getting the parties together and learning from each other, and including cooperation across regions. Right now, we're working on a statewide solar survey so we can understand what's going on around the state, what localities have done already, what they have in mind doing in the near future. So these are all things we're working on right now, and we'll be expanding these activities in the future as we move forward. This is part of a much larger initiative at the Weldon Cooper Center. We're partnering with DMME for a comprehensive state energy planning process. We're working right now on carrying out a very substantial energy modeling project for Virginia, where we're going to develop a model that can be used to understand how we can achieve statewide decarbonization and in particular, the renewables transition in the electricity sector. So that's a project we're undertaking this summer. We should be reporting out on our first modeling effort in the fall, and that can be used for planning the next round of initiatives for the state. We're undertaking an electricity demand forecast. It's the first time we've had an electricity demand forecast outside of what the utilities produce for themselves. We're in the process of building a state energy dashboard so we can track how we're doing in the development of renewables in the state. We're working on a number of policy design initiatives. What kind of refinements can we make to our approach to state policy on energy to help achieve the renewables transition in the most cost-effective way? And we're also beginning a process of thinking about statewide land use modeling so we understand what the implications are for the state as a whole of adding renewables development to the state's portfolio of economic activities. So these are all projects that are in process right now that we're working on at the Cooper Center, and we'll be reporting out over the course of this coming year. And we're looking forward to having conversations with many of the listeners to this broadcast about the approach to the renewable transition in Virginia. All right, so thank you very much. That's the end of my slides. I very much hope that when you're able to get in touch with us, you'll get in touch with Elizabeth Marshall or come to our website. and we'll be developing new information and developing processes for input about solar development in Virginia.
Great. Thank you very much for that presentation, Dr. Shub. Our next featured speaker is Dr. Ron Myers of Virginia Tech. Dr. Myers, why don't you go ahead and begin sharing your screen, and I'll provide your brief bio here. Dr. Myers, with the Renewable Energy Facility Siting Project, research assistant professor in the Department of Fish and Wildlife Conservation at Virginia Tech. Dr. Myers works as a social scientist conducting research and practice on how to develop a more sustainable renewable energy system in the U.S. and to promote consensus around renewable energy projects. With that, Dr. Myers, the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. Have you activated my screen from your end? John?
I'm sorry, give me 1 second because I think I need to make you a co-host again. I apologize because I think when you sign back out, let me give me one.
Yes. So as to be efficient with our time, which I love to do. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm also a little humbled in the presence of these experts. I mean, Dr. Shob himself, even though he was a little humble, is certainly laid out an incredible agenda of work up at UVA. And in keeping with the traditions of Virginia, we'll of course try to keep up as much as we can down here at Virginia Tech. I don't know if we can do that. I think in the big picture, after listening to my colleagues, there's some themes running through here, which isn't surprising at all. And if I were to add another slide instantaneously, I might say that we're both focused on the big picture as well as providing real help, a real helping hand with specific projects that people need. So let me tell you how we might be doing that. John, am I up yet?
You should have control now. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's go into slideshow mode. There we go. Sheep.
Not sharing yet. Maybe are you selecting the application for share screen?
There we go. One last step. Is that it?
That's it. Thank you.
Great. Well, it was interesting to talk to our colleague about her experience growing up on a family farm with sheep, and how now that for many of us, our dream of having solar being cost competitive, or actually the lowest cost for energy production now in the long run, economically, as well as environmentally, we believe here, and actually, I think socially. We're finding through our work that, let me advance the screen. This incredible dream of having solar PV provide quiet, abandoned mine land free, smokestack free energy does exactly what Dr. Shob talked about, right? It's a significant change in land use, which runs into, of course, concerns at the local level. And from our research, we're finding a significant percentage of projects that are proposed run into local extreme concern, opposition that actually tears communities apart. So my goal, our goal with our project has been to really study the dynamics of this. I'm both a social scientist and environmental scientist, and went into community organizing to work with communities, a former government EPA official enforcing environmental laws, and now as faculty, trying to tie things together to solve what some people would call a somewhat wicked problem, and that there are many aspects to how you cite that have been talked about before that need to be brought together. And we're focused on solutions. A lot of my colleagues are focused upon identifying the problems. And today I'm glad to see that my fellow presenters are also focused upon solutions. And for us, we've kind of tried to distill what we're seeing works into things that are recommendations. And our biggest three right now are insights into what's going on is that when you reduce project risk of community opposition from their variety of concerns, that actually helps your bottom line. So it may take a little more and money up front, as you'll see from other recommendations, but it pays off in the long run. We also see that coupling local economic development with projects is one of the biggest community concerns, and it actually helps developers achieve their interests when the local economic interests are also addressed. In terms of social and regulatory sustainability, we're working in the sustainability rubric that we didn't develop the idea of sustainability by any stretch of the imagination, but in terms of applying it to simplify the complexity, that's what we're working on. Trust from the beginning is absolutely key to working through all these issues to find what Dr. Shobe referred to as gains for more people, that is both economic and social and environmental gains for everybody. So we think that developing partnerships can yield a very high return. And this is not rocket science in terms of an idea, but I think it's somewhat rocket science in terms of people actually doing this consistently across a state. And that's what we want to help develop. And I think our state is in a great position to do that. This may surprise some developers, but as a former regulator who literally signed off on NEPA documents, the regulators, the local permitting agencies get a sense pretty quickly of whether or not developers really want to comply with the law in its fullness and go a little bit extra if that's reasonable from a cost perspective. And when you build trust between permitting agencies and you as developers and the public around this, things tend to go more smoothly. Finally, around environmental sustainability. Sacrificing ecological value of the landscape for economic gain is really a big obstacle to success. So from what we're understanding, and we need to learn a lot more, pardon me, marginal increases in project costs to protect the environment really yield lots of reduction in the long run of permitting problems and public opposition. The public knows when folks are working to maintain ecological values. So we say upfront research and planning around the environmental impacts, the economic impacts really improves project prospects. And this is just our way of trying to pull together these very many concerns that there are. Our team and our ability to pull the research together, to apply it, to work with communities, to work with developers and work with governments is based upon sort of this heuristic. And I've brought in many more people that are even listed in this diagram to work on environmental issues. How can you site without adverse bird, bat, habitat impacts? How can we quickly assess endangered, threatened, and listed species impacts and come up with solutions to those, and so on. I'm going to move on from here. Our commitment here at Virginia Tech, under our idea of ut prosum, which is, may I serve, is to build trust and find the mutual gains. The good news is that generally with any project, if it's planned carefully, we can reduce economic problems by increasing local economic benefits and increasing the overall bottom line for developers. So we want to grow both. We want to actually have environmental and ecological values on a site that's large improved. We think we can do this. Social equity can be improved rather than having conflictual processes filled with suspicion. We're working on ways to have everybody work together to find fair distribution, beautifully designed facilities that work on the landscape and work in the community, and then in the end, do something dramatic, build local capacity to make difficult decisions. So our goals are that: social fairness, meaningful participation in local economic gains, local industry and economic development. And this may seem repetitive, but it's hard to do in practice. So we're keeping our eye on these goals. And trust. I have a colleague who is wonderful and developed a theory of trust ecology, Dr. Mark Stern, who works with us, and another colleague, Dr. Todd Schenk, who works with us and actually takes the lead on the public engagement. And it's about being inclusive, bringing everybody's voice to the table, respecting the developer's interest in economic returns, as well as their interest in carbon-free electricity, and the community's interests, and the need to do research at the local level, as well as drawing upon the resources of our other colleagues. And just saying at the beginning, we're going to seek mutual gains for all. And we recognize that not every site, every community is appropriate or suited for a large-scale development. And if this can be identified quickly in the process and developers don't take a big loss by fighting a project tooth and nail for a year and a half, but realize very early on that this is a community where it's probably not going to work, that saves everybody's interest too. So we could frame this up three ways: from local government's perspective, the public's perspective, and developers' perspective, in order to make sure that we meet each of these interests. From a local government perspective, we are eager to work with you, with the planning commissions, like we're beginning to work with the Roanoke Planning Commission here, to find ways to reduce the conflict. Nobody likes conflict, we know that. It's a waste of time and money in so many cases. And again, going back to the theme of win-win solutions. So we want to help folks find the trusted information on various impacts that apply for their specific projects and help them work through it. Our proposed way to do this is that the local government would actually be in charge of the VT team and making sure that we're being responsive to the local community. And that industry would then fund upfront Virginia Tech to a small amount to have our team form this partnership with the local government, with the public, and with the industry proposing the facility, to have us work with all parties to come out with the best solution. From the public's point of view, of course, getting you involved right from the beginning is so important because you do have many concerns. We understand that. And you can see similar interests on all people's parts. Getting you to the table is extremely important. We do want the public to understand that because industry are the ones proposing the project, that this approach should work to have the public trust Virginia Tech as a neutral mediator, arbitrator, facilitator, however you want to look at it, from the very beginning, to bring everybody into the room and to have industry pay for the process, but to have local government authorize the payments to us. And that may be in the weeds, but we've tried to think this through carefully on what will work for everybody. And from the developer's point of view, have the public engaged in a way that's productive for you with your development, so that their concerns or interests are brought to the table, and local economic experts are brought in. We think that the benefits to industry of having permitting uncertainty reduced to this process are enormous. And the dramatic thing, as Bill was mentioning before, is if we think about this as a statewide or a Commonwealth-wide issue, each project that's developed successfully using these principles makes each successive project easier. That would be the goal, is to develop an approach to siting that the community embraces, that they can say, yes, we want these developments because they will maintain our local important values and interests, and developers can also provide economic benefits and get their projects through. So how do we do this? Social sustainability. We use meaning management process. Here is a kind of our pilot project out of Catawba that I'll go into in more depth. As I said before, we identify the interest of parties. You can see here these various large visual things that we've provided here are alternative rough site plans that we developed as the potential developer on this Virginia Tech property. So we identified with the community and our own site managers rough parcels where a facility could go. And on these parcels, we generated photorealistic images of 6 alternatives and brought them to the community and said, which of these do you prefer? And we worked with landscape architects. It's a wonderful thing to have our School of Architecture collaborating on where on the landscape would you tweak the placement and the arrays in order to have it have the least visual impact on the area. So as has been noted before, there are multiple uses for land. Agricultural products can be done. It actually increases local income by doing this. It lowers the maintenance cost, and it's very safe for arrays. I guess I won't go into this in much depth, but these are some dramatic pictures. The one on the right, a development done out west, which of course we would not do here, but to provide, as you see, the lower pictures and the pictures on the left, really productive land cover that we can help a local community and developer identify through a desktop assessment what's the best type of forage or habitat that you would want in an area. We can do a lot through the GIS and with our expertise that we have. We can also then identify if there's any additional environmental concerns that need to be investigated through field research and try to identify the most efficient, that is low cost and high benefit options for the public and the developers and the permitting agencies to consider altogether. There are ways that we can increase biodiversity through these habitat plannings, and especially in the perhaps up to 50% of the land area that is not directly impacted by solar PV panel placement, but is in between the panels and around the site in areas where developers have had to secure the land but aren't using it. There are things that we can do for wildlife planning and biodiversity improvements to make the net land impacts be environmentally positive. So that's our strategy for this. As I mentioned before, our Catawba pilot, there's about a 1,200 acre site in a really historic valley. It's been settled for about 300 years here because this is the area where settlers moved through in order to get through to the west in this part of the state. And we found that bringing folks together, like the Appalachian Trail community, where the Appalachian Trail's most iconic site and the entire trail runs on this ridgeline, as you see above here. McAfee's Knob is there, down the ridgeline. Dragon's Tooth is at the other end of this ridgeline in this valley. They were very concerned with visual impacts, as was the community. We really only wanted to get perhaps 50 or 60 acres developed here. So we worked with the community to figure out which acreage would be suitable. And we found that the process worked really wonderfully. The community came out and we actually did a recommendation or explored recommendations around small wind and large wind, and surprisingly found that the community embraced small wind, but it wasn't economically feasible. So we did not recommend that. The stakeholder participation process, you start small with the key stakeholders, and you snowball to get more and more people involved. And by our last community meeting, we had a large number of people carefully considering each of the proposed sites and sharing their concerns, and the community came out strongly in favor of this development. So we're waiting for Virginia Tech to get where UVA is and to authorize the university to move forward on these projects. But we think we've done an important part of the work by obtaining community input, and the local planning commission has not officially said that this is a good project because there's been no permit applied for, but they've been participating in the process and we've responded to their concerns. So we think there's a bright future for projects like this. We are looking for several pilots with developers and local communities. So please feel free to reach out to me. And that concludes my presentation.
Dr. Myers, thank you very much for that presentation. It's about 11:07. We'll have a little bit of time for some Q&A through the chat section here. Meanwhile, I'm going to start a poll, a single question poll, just for the participants. If you could give us some feedback on a scale of 1 being low to 5 high, please rate how this informational webinar helped to increase your awareness of new resources, programs, and contacts regarding utility scale solar farms in Virginia. And this is an anonymous poll. So thank you for any feedback that you have. As we mentioned before, please submit any questions in the chat box. If we're able to, during this brief Q&A period, we'll get to them. But if not, we'll try to respond offline. Carrie was able to rejoin, but had to sign off again due to a meeting conflict. So as questions come in, I can kind of farm those out based on how we can respond. And Carrie's indicated her willingness to help provide feedback. Some of the questions in the poll relate more to solar PV, kind of the fundamentals of photovoltaic technology, how the technology works, some of those types of questions. I'll point you towards the web page that I mentioned where this recorded webinar will be posted. Towards the bottom of that web page are some related resources with some information specific to utility scale solar PV, but then also some links to kind of understanding photovoltaic systems themselves. So I think that could be a good resource for that. One thing I want to make sure we're real clear with the session is, and each of the presentations express this, but I want to reiterate, for the UVA Center and at Virginia Tech, could you just briefly again describe, if there's an interested person out there, community out there, the best way to engage your program? Dr. Myers, I'll start with you. You're muted.
I would say send us an email and say that you're interested in this and we can begin to explore it. Actually assembled this team and they're literally ready to go. We're wrapping up 2 pilots. One was actually with UVA at the Milton Airfield where we did a similar assessment. And we found that happily we were able to solve the local siting potential conflicts there. And we're looking forward to partnering with UVA to see the future of that, as well as here at Virginia Tech, we're eager to partner with you. Yeah, so just give us an email.
Thank you very much, Dr. Myers. So an email for the Virginia Tech program, and Dr. Schob, best way for someone to make contact with the program at UVA.
Yeah, so it's the same here. Elizabeth Marshall is our key person for the Virginia Solar Initiative. Her email is on the last slide of my presentation. You can also go to our website and make contact through there. The website is on the last page of my presentation. And you know, for those that are interested in general information, you know, the Solar Energy Industries Association is a great place to go. If you're, for example, a landowner wanting to think about this for yourself, you can find a list of solar developers who operate in the state of Virginia who would be very happy to talk to you. But for the purposes of contacting us for the work we're doing, an email or visiting our website are the 2 best ways to do it.
Great, thank you very much. Going through the chat box here, some questions under the category of kind of the project development. What are some of the siting considerations from an energy generation interconnect perspective? There's a question there where I take it a landowner is curious if having a major power transmission line through their property would be advantageous. So speaking more broadly, what are some of the siting criteria from an energy from a project development standpoint that
Well, I'll just go ahead and Ron, you can step in. So actually being close to a substation is more important than being close to a transmission line, I think. Although we're getting, into technical details that I'm not that familiar with, but I'm pretty sure that what's important is being close to a substation. And being close to a transmission line may mean you're not that far from a substation, but getting connected to the grid means going through a substation.
Great.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Great, thank you. And another question, maybe under that same umbrella, is a curiosity of the economics of these types of projects from a landowner's perspective. Maybe a brief description of general project development models and how the actual landowner is impacted by those or engaged in those.
Bill, you want to take first crack?
Well, just what landowners do is, generally speaking, lease their land to a solar developer for development of the project. And these leases will generally be for, I think, for 30 years for development of the project. And I think it's is a sense in which it's relatively simple. What the specific terms of the lease are, I'm not, maybe Ron, you know more about that than I do, but generally speaking, a landowner will lease their land to the developer for the duration.
Well, if I can speak pretty straightforward, it's a bonanza for the leaseholder, for the landowner. It really can change their lives, actually. And so the question becomes actually then, if the landowner is going to get such significant benefits from it, and the community has to look at it, how do you distribute those benefits? So one landowner would get a brand new truck and a nice vacation with their proceeds from it, and the neighbor has to look at it. And so hence you get into community benefits. So that's sort of my perspective on it. The community can also gain benefits from the tax revenues, but these have to be looked at carefully. And so I think Bill's work and Elizabeth's work is very important about making sure that the benefits are distributed fairly. But going back to the landowners things, they could do very well.
Great, thank you both for those responses. I'll also highlight on the webpage link resources. There are a few resources for maybe call them best practices, landowner considerations for negotiating some of these lease agreements, one in YouTube format and a couple of PDFs. So just keep an eye on for those if that's an area you're interested in as well. It's about 11:15. And I think what we could do at this point is just see if there's any final comments from Dr. Myers and Dr. Shobe. Dr. Myers, any closing comments?
Yeah, this is a great time in Virginia for development of this, as Dr. Shobe pointed out. What a dramatic change is coming, and it could be done well, or it could be done not so well. It can divide communities, or it can bring them together to find solutions. It could adversely affect the environment if things are not done well. And if it's done well, I think it can really be a win-win in many situations. And in those situations where it ought not be done, let's figure that out and take them off the table there. So I think that helps developers and communities. So we're eager to partner with more communities. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Myers. Dr. Shobe?
I think we're at the very beginning of a very substantial new development opportunity for a lot of localities. And I think that it's important for us to plan well and maximize the opportunities from renewables development. And I think there will be lots of opportunities. And I think it's time for us to pay attention to the planning processes in localities. And so if you think, if you're engaged in this either as a landowner, a developer, or another a local planner, it's really important that we start by getting the local planning processes engaged and people start thinking about this. And I think as we develop more of these projects and get experience with these kind of projects, there will be a much more regular process of developing these new facilities. And I think that will be a big gain.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Shob. And I think we'll stop there. I want to thank all the featured speakers. Carrie Hearn from the State Energy Office, Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. Elizabeth Marshall with UVA, Dr. Shob with UVA, and Dr. Myers with Virginia Tech. Hey, thank you all for sharing information about the programs and efforts that you're leading. I think this was really helpful. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you and have a good day.